Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad, and today we're talking about AERGO. That's right, we are here with the CEO and Chairman. His name is Phil Zamani. Phil, thank you very much for being on the channel today.
Hi, Brad.
So obviously you are the CEO. That means you're in the top seat for AERGO. It stands for essentially an open source platform, but it's so much more than that. It's all about being the blockchain fuel for autonomous business. And most importantly, you're trying to really provide for an end-to-end platform. Let's explore that though in detail. What does it actually mean, Phil, when we talk about end-to-end, this kind of robust plan that you have?
Yeah, so it's a good question. It's quite hard to explain, so let me try and give you a summary description first.
Sure.
Yeah, let's break it down, Brad. So for a blockchain platform to be usable by business, it's not only needs to be a blockchain platform. There's many other things that you need to consider for an enterprise to be even considering this as a platform and then use this. What people often overlook at a basic level, blockchain is a database. But if a business wants to deploy a blockchain, they've got to really think through how could this help their customers or their supply chain. And that often means what apps will run on the platform. And these apps not only need to be distributed, they need to work at scale, they need to be mobile often, they need to be internet-based, but they also need to be really secure. So we don't consider AERGO just to be a blockchain protocol. It's actually a platform because it combines what we call the four dimensions, and hence why we call this a four-dimensional platform. On the one hand, it has the best of blockchain, which we can expand on later. Second is it brings in enterprise software development capabilities to really allow businesses to build enterprise apps, not games, not social media apps, real applications like healthcare applications or pharmaceutical applications or retail applications. The third thing is we bring in the whole open source mantra. Everything we do will be anchored and built around an open source methodology, because it's so important that if you want to be adopted by businesses, you need developers. Developers follow an open source model, hence we are an open source platform. And the fourth element, which is the fourth dimension, is the skills and expertise that we bring through our partner, BlockO. We've had the benefit of a partner working with the technology for 4 years and testing this and bringing what we call deployment blueprints, know-how cookbooks of how to deploy this in business at scale. So we combine that as well. So blockchain, enterprise software, including cloud, an open source core mentality, and then we bring the skills together. And those four things together are what we call the AERGO platform.
Right, so clearly there's quite a few different components to it. We really do need to break this down for the audience to really understand, but I do appreciate your overview you've provided for a really good insight into what you represent. Let's explore this though, that with regard to your mechanism first. Let's go into some tech. You are based on your DPoS. I want to talk though more about the democracy, the inbuilt voting system. Why is it important to have something that's really going to be for the people so they can have a voice in the mechanism itself?
Yeah, so the people are really three stakeholders. It's the people who may own tokens, it's for developers, and it's actually the customers themselves. So if you're going to run a business application, you will never deploy an enterprise application without support. So very few companies understand that in the blockchain space. If you want to work with a bank or work with a large manufacturing company or a large, let's say, healthcare company, they will always want back-to-back support for everything they deploy. That means everything has to work. It has to be scalable. It has to be secure. So the so-called infrastructure that they run, including the block providers, needs to be enterprise grade. So we have this notion of making sure that people who come into the AERGO ecosystem are not some wannabe kids who just want to be block providers and gain some tokens. These will be companies like telcos, like hosters, who understand what deploying things mean for businesses in terms of high frequency trading or high performance. So we want really enterprise grade infrastructure providers. Now the DPoS is we believe the best compromise of decentralization and trust, in that we will have probably around 23 is our current view of block providers, but there will be enterprise grade, 23 customers who have very large systems. So for example, Samsung uses our system for credit card authentication. The government in Korea is using our blockchain for voting in one of the jurisdictions. The local stock exchange, KRX, has a local OTC trading platform, the first in the world built on our technology. So we have many endpoints already in use. What they want now is to see the next generation. Can we scale up? Can we start using public chains? So we have the benefit of a local customer base, but we also want to grow in every region of the world: Australia, China, UK, USA, India. So we're selectively looking for clients who first of all understand what we're trying to build, share our vision of distributed trust, and want to engage with us. So we will pick a few customers to work with to prove the technology. We're not in a rush.
Let's talk about that though, Phil, because, you know, obviously you have 23. These are big players. You've mentioned some big names, for example, Hyundai, Samsung. I mean, the list goes on. Government, I've heard you mention that also with regard to voting potential and even OTC, as you've said. Now, if that's replicated globally, they're going to be like sort of enterprises, significant ones. Who are you talking to right now around the world? Who can you tell us? You know,
yes, what I can say is that we've expanded from Korea. So 3 months ago, we were 45 people. We've now doubled the team within the last 3 months. We're nearly 90 people, of which 60 are developers, engineers. So we have a core base here in Seoul. We now have offices in London, offices in Berlin, offices in Toronto, Canada, and even in Brazil. So we will be hiring developers anywhere in the world, high quality developers, anywhere we find them. Secondly, we will be deploying business development teams in the countries where we find willing customers. We do not have a pre-set plan whether we should prioritize Australia versus Bangladesh or the UK. We will talk to many clients and try to find clients who want to test this technology and work with them. So those teams are business development teams. What I can say, you can expect Ergo's partner, BlockO, to double in size every 6 months for the next 2 years.
Right.
Quite a large undertaking. 23 customers. They will stake tokens to be able to provide the services here, but every token holder has a vote. So we're building a reputation-based model on top of DPoS to allow all token holders to vote with their tokens. So the system has a self-regulating democratic architecture around this. So if any provider tends to gain too much control or starts to interfere with the goodness of the system, they will get voted out.
Right, and that part's quite important because you've mentioned that there's going to be this entity, this governance system inbuilt with the 23 representatives for that. That harps back to some other things we've seen, certainly Elastis with their Cyber Republics doing this with their serverless system. We're also seeing this with Hashgraph, with the underpinning organization that they have for their governance models. This is really no different in that respect, but I think you make the point that you have an inbuilt system that is really ensuring that there isn't malign activity. There's an insurance mechanism to stop that. What do you say, though, to those who have that purist argument that there really should be no governance system? It really should be just purely decentralized.
Yeah, well, that's a theoretical approach, I think. It's the same debate around DAO. So DAO hasn't yet proven to be something you can really, really rely on. Perhaps in the next 5 or 6, 7 years, when these technologies get tested and people get used to them, maybe you could have a completely decentralized organization. But it's almost like saying, you never need to vote a government in. You can vote the government in once, and it's going to be there forever. Things change.
Sure.
Life, technology. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about change. You're leading the change with one big word, and that is hybridization. And that's with regard to the public and the permissioned or these private chains coming together. Phil, talk us through that. Why is this something that genuinely sets you apart from the other plans that we see building out?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Brad. So there seems to be a lot of discussion at the moment of the benefits of public versus private. You know, I often say that in tech, you know, having spent most of my career, 30 years in technology, I've observed patterns with disruptive technologies. It came with HTTP and TCP/IP 30 years ago. Then it was Linux, open source. Then it was OpenStack and cloud computing, Android. They say that technology doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme in terms of what happens. And this debate about private or public is actually the wrong debate. If you turn this around and think of the customer, the user, what are they trying to achieve? They're trying to do something of value, exchange value or buy goods or trade. What they want is really good technology that helps them achieve their objectives. Whilst blockchain is a brilliant architecture, there are some levers you can pull, but you can't pull them all at the same time. You can have maximum trust and decentralization in a public chain. That's great. However, there are many use cases in business and government where it's unlikely the government will put all their data on a public chain on everyone's disk. Therefore, you need maximum control in terms of a permission system. But if you have a permission system that's controlled by an entity, who will trust it? Only the company that controls the data. So what you need is to combine maximum governance and throughput, which is typically on a private chain, with maximum trust and a public chain. But doing those two things together is quite complex. It's almost like the ideal scenario. We have 4 years of experience of building very secure, very highly performant, high throughput systems for banks and governments in Korea. on the permission basis. We've been monitoring the technology in the public chain for the last 3 to 4 years. We think now the technology is matured enough and the skills have matured enough and the protocols to allow these two worlds to exist. So the trick is when you can actually combine the two. And what AERGO proposes to do is combine the best of private chains and public chains through so-called sidechain technology.
And we're going to talk about that in a moment, Phil, so I'll make sure we do talk about the sidechain tech that you've built in. But let's move across to BlockO for a moment. Now, you mentioned that there's been 4 years had of a lot of research done by the team. Can you tell us exactly what they do as the support structure for AERGO, or AERGO rather, and really talk us through why they are so important as you move through the next phase as well?
Yeah, so BlockO is a company based here in South Korea. I'm calling in from Seoul here. There are two brilliant engineers who came up with a great idea 4 years ago. Why do we take the best of the Bitcoin protocol and the best of the Ethereum VM and build a software development environment to try out using blockchain in production? Now, these two engineers were ex-database research fellows. They've had spent a lot of time on big databases. They understand the need for database to work within IT. And they built a system. It's called CoinStack. So CoinStack is a version of blockchain built for private implementations.
Right.
They started doing work here in Korea with a number of companies, initially doing proof of concepts. Luckily, one of their customers earlier was Samsung. Samsung was so impressed with the team, they invested in the company. So Samsung put in the so-called Series A investment. And since that happened, many companies in Korea have seen the interest grow in blockchain, and of course they follow BlockO because BlockO has a very strong brand name. So BlockO has moved from being a consulting-led PLC consulting organization to a full enterprise deployment organization that will help any company pragmatically look at whether blockchain is or is not relevant, and if so, how can it be built? So not only does it work, but it works within the context of these business ecosystems. So I'm glad to say that they've now done 24 projects at last count. We have here in Korea over 25 million endpoints in production running on private blockchains built by BlockO. And we often say that people don't know that this company in South Korea is probably after IBM has the most deployed production systems in blockchain, but nobody out of Korea has heard of them. Hence, that's BlockO.
Right, and that's quite common of permission blockchains because, as you mentioned, a lot of these associations are with huge enterprises or big companies, and they really are just providing for quality technology support for them. Now, you're, again, that hybridized feature moving on. Phil, do you think you could have achieved this without BlockO? If you had, what it would have meant for you? If you couldn't go and align with them, would you have been able to find something as good anywhere in the world?
We don't think so. And the alternative would have been to write a white paper like many other people do, put it on Steemit or on Medium, and then hopefully people will come and work with us. Right. The truth is, this company's been in stealth mode. So without BlockO's skills, experience, and also their customers, we would never been able to actually even envision this new architecture. Right. So AERGO is taking the BlockO skills to a different level.
And Phil, did you approach BlockO, or did BlockO approach you for the top job?
I was approached by BlockO's CEO as an advisor earlier in the year when he started considering the use of open source and enterprise IT. We found each other. We had dinner in a Korean restaurant in London. It's a funny story. Within 2 hours, we clicked and we just got on.
Well, let's talk about why, because I've written down a few of your impressive resume, business work experience achievements. Now, you've worked for Red Hat, you've also worked for SpringSource and others, but the Red Hat's what I want to talk to you about. Now, you were the leader of a project in which you really built at the global enterprise for them. Can you talk us through why this kind of experience is so relevant for what you're doing now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in 1998, literally 20 years ago, Brad, open source was really coming to the fore. And the first project that came out was a so-called compiler called GNU or GCC. Now, at the same time, Linux came out, and Red Hat very quickly attained cult status in the community, built a very strong brand. They did an IPO, an initial public offering, raised $3 billion, and then they started buying all the technology companies in open source. And I got acquired, the company I worked for got acquired by Red Hat. And what happened from 2000 onwards, Red Hat embarked on a journey. The journey was to educate customers on the art of what is possible to use Linux in IT, enterprise IT. So for 2 years, all we did was work with customers to understand what they were trying to do and work with them to build reference cases. So I did that for 2 years in Europe. Then I moved on to an international role with Red Hat. And it was quite exciting because it was almost like where blockchain is today. People got it. They understood it could do certain things, but they wanted to then see it in real use in the business. And this is where BlockO and blockchain is right now. We're at the cusp of moving from proof of concepts and early customers to mass deployments. And that's where we are. It's very similar to Red Hat. I learned many things in Red Hat. I learned about open source and developers, and we try to bring that skill set into the whole ecosystem here in AERGO.
Right. Well, let's talk about now the two steps. In 2018, where we're at in terms of the technology, the blockchain focus, and then we'll move across to 2019 with regard to the cloud computing focus. Talk us through that, especially in reference to enterprise to business discussions you're having, and what your vision is, I suppose, as you move out into the real use case environment.
That's good. Good question again, Brad. So if you follow what I said earlier around having a hybrid chain where you have a private chain running at high performance and where the companies are trying to protect their data. So this is a private chain, but you need the connection to a public chain to provide the trust, and you connect the two. Mm-hmm. The public chain is AERGO Chain. AERGO Chain is a public chain that anybody can use. Most of its usage is free. It's only when you start unlocking extra features like extra storage or extra CPUs that will use, in effect, you will use the equivalent of some form of steam power, if you like. But on the private side, you want to run your private chain on a very secure, very high-performing network. Some businesses will run it themselves in their so-called data centers, where they have their own firewalls, their own servers, they have whole teams. Typically, banks or very large companies run their own data centers. But over 95% of the companies don't run their own IT. They outsource this. They will run it on some infrastructure.
And as you said, they function like silos. They're not interactive. They're not certainly open source in that respect either.
Correct. So the best example I can give you is AWS. AWS is a fantastic system. It liberalized the usage of IT for not only developers, but enterprise companies, where you can rent server capacity, CPU, memory, data, databases at will, and just switch them on and off. What we envisage is exactly the same scenario, but the difference is this infrastructure will not be run by one provider like AWS. It will be run by multiple providers. So the first phase is to get the public chain ready, which we're doing right now. And then during 2019, we will start unlocking the features which will allow companies to deploy their private chains on a very highly efficient system in Australia, in the UK, in China, in whichever country, on a local cloud infrastructure. That's what's coming next year.
Right. Well, let's talk about the sidechains now, Phil, as well. You mentioned them before. How important is the sidechain to the scalability? And also my understanding is that you're allowing for a really innovative testing facility or a testing capacity for those businesses who want to trial out accessing the sidechain to test the scalability, when they're typically on that main chain of their own. So how important is it to have this sidechain aspect of your design?
Yeah, so that's, again, a good question, Brad. So sidechains often gets intermingled with other buzzwords like plasma technology. Mm-hmm. Now, the simplest way to understand this is imagine two motorways, two lanes, and one lane has cars running at high speed, and that's the private chain, high speed. And then the other highway is full of lorries with fuel, lots of fuel.
Right.
Okay, and they're driving slowly. Well, the cars consume quickly, but every few hours they have to refuel and connect to the lorry to refuel. It's pretty much how sidechain technology works. It allows a fast chain, sidechain, mm-hmm. to communicate with a public chain for trust. So a sidechain is the ability to run two chains or multiple chains together. Right. Now, what people think is happening are assets that are transferring from one chain to another. It's actually an illusion. What happens is the assets remain on one chain, but they talk to the other chain to validate the transaction authenticity. Mm-hmm. So when that happens, the sidechain allows this chain to freeze the token until the token becomes available on the other chain. So no data is transferred. What is transferred is trust. This mm-hmm. transaction talks to this transaction. If it's validated, unlock the token on the other chain. So data is not transferred over. It's just an optical illusion to give you the ability of a high-speed chain running the cars in a slow, public, trusted chain to work together and connect. So
Right.
see a sidechain as the ability for these two things to interact without performance degradation.
So if, to use that analogy, let's say Argo is the highway, and then we have the sidechains, again, harping back to the business as I guess the paradigm shift. You're enabling for business to really flourish on the blockchain and even beyond that. Phil, how are we going to, utilizing something like Argo, encourage businesses to make the transition? If we're using the analogy of they're sitting on the sidelines capable, but have to interact with something that is mainstream, it is the highway. How are we going to onboard these and really build this out for mass adoption potential?
Yeah, and again, I use the Amazon AWS as an example. AWS is a way to provision and use a centralized architecture to build your application, your business. Often enterprises use AWS to get the application up and running, to test it, to QA it, to scale it out. But then they move it from this public cloud to their private instance. Their transition is over. Why do they do this? Because they can then control the data. It can be high performance, and they get better usage because they're not renting hardware from AWS. So that provisioning to and fro is what we're building within our system. So the idea is an enterprise or an application developer can use a public chain for free to test, develop their architecture, and then when they're ready to scale, they can switch over either to a private chain or a hybrid. It's literally a switch. It's a provisioning. And what a provisioning means, switch this from the public chain to a separate chain where you control the performance and you're paying for that performance. And the tokens are used to enable this transition. So if you're running a public chain to test, but then you want to deploy for whatever reason a private chain, you will use tokens to buy those services from a telco provider or somebody else who will allow you to switch the sidechain onto a dedicated piece of compute equipment.
Right, and there's not really anything else out there that, to my knowledge, enabling that kind of switch. Is that right?
Correct. This is completely new.
Okay, so let's talk about now sustainability for a moment, Phil, because I want to try and understand you are open source. That means you're a free software for those to go and access. Developers are going to love this. But how are you going to be sustainable in the long term with your model? What's your biz plan in terms of connecting with clients, connecting with businesses that are going to utilize your service?
Yeah, so it's, again, a really good question, Brad, and people haven't really thought this through longer term. But I'll use an example to explain this. When Linux came out, Linux was a free piece of software. In fact, it was many pieces of software together, thousands of projects. So Linux is free. But going back to what I said earlier, businesses don't deploy things unless somebody stands behind the technology and provides 24/7, 365 days support. That's called enterprise support or subscription services.
That's called BlockO.
Yes, that's exactly right. So BlockO wants to emerge to be the red hat of enterprise ergo support. So as companies get used to this technology, and it will take a few years before this technology gets adopted and tested and QA'd and improved, but when they deploy, they will want someone to stand behind the technology to provide that assurance, and that is BlockO. So what we hope will happen is as our technology hopefully gets QA'd, criticized, enhanced by developers, and it gets adopted, companies will deploy their business applications on an Aergo platform, then they will request support, and they will request support from BlockO. Aergo is a foundation. It's a not-for-profit organization building the tech. BlockO is a company that will provide the services on top of that to support customers as they deploy.
Right. So is there any aspect in which you will create revenue that you will via specific enterprise clients? Is there any mechanism in which you can build up that revenue stream?
Yeah, so for Aergo itself, we want to make the platform pervasive. If the platform gets adopted, more users come into the ecosystem, more businesses use the platform, more cloud providers want to provide their services to local businesses. So I'll give you an example. If you are a business in Germany or in Korea, you may not want to run your infrastructure on AWS in America, in Seattle. You may want to run it in Seoul. So if your local telco can run Aergo locally on their fiber, on their network, high-grade performance, speaks your language for support, of course they're going to pick the local provider. So as the technology gets adopted, the ecosystem grows. The value becomes important. The tokens, which are limited, because they're a unit of exchange of value, have inherent value. We reserve tokens within the ecosystem to support not only the block providers, the developers, but also as we build the architecture, there's sufficient reserve built into the pool to give us a long burn cycle. And now we have the
Right.
benefit. Now we have BlockO supporting us right now. So the technology is pretty much ready. So there's not a lot of work going on right now to make the core technology working. But as we develop the next generation platform, we need more developers here. So
Sure.
the simple answer is, as the technology gets used, it becomes more useful, the utility increases, the value of the tokens become higher because people want to use the service, and then the foundation can actually sell some of the tokens to other people who want to gain those tokens to actually provide services. So as more hosting providers come in to provide services, they need to acquire tokens. They can buy those tokens through the foundation. We will liquidate and use those funds to plow money back into the organization, into the development community, and other companies who will come on board to help us build the ecosystem.
Right. So obviously there's two factors there. There's the scarcity element you've mentioned of the tokenomics, and also you've already built in a longitudinal plan to make sure that you're providing for the needs and the viability and sustainability of the company, and literally company, as you build out to support the development through the devs. Now, on that note, you mentioned BlockO has, a significant number of supporters, of users. Can you talk us through the stats with regard to what kind of numbers are they? They're a pre-existent entity in and of themselves. They have their own user base. How important is that, and what kind of numbers are you bringing on into the open source ecosystem? And also, how are you building that out in the global frame with offices that are moving in the global sort of position?
Sure. We are doing two things, Brad. At the moment, we have the benefit of having a local customer base that's very happy with the BlockO technology. So we have around 23 paid customers who are paying for support for BlockO. They're using the existing technology called CoinStack. Most of them are aware that CoinStack is now being supercharged into a newer platform called AERGO. They are very keen to get their hands on this new way of developing private CoinStack-based and public blockchain.
Absolutely. And Phil, with your experience with Red Hat, that was one thing that was quite fascinating to me, because right now the argument is that you can't have simply high quality tech, but you need to have this very sophisticated marketing plan that's really going to underpin the overall adoption potential. Is this something you think that potentially many of these other companies are missing the mark on, given your experience with the Red Hat? And is it also why you're reasonably aggressive with your roadmap in terms of the pace?
Yes, I think this is probably the biggest thing that most startups misunderstand. You need great tech, you need great partners, you need great customers, but unless you can find a way to communicate your value and engage with clients, both on the marketing side, the business development, the tech side, and the consulting side, you're never going to find the customers you need in the time frame needed. So many of these projects are great projects, very theoretical in many cases. They misunderstand the need for business development. If you look at, again, all these software companies who succeeded in open source, the ones that broke through, Red Hat, Cloudera, Hortonworks, MongoDB, they all had one thing in common. They built great tech, and then they deployed specialist people in the countries to have a conversation with clients to explain, what are you trying to achieve? Tell us what you want, then let us show you what you need. And by the way, we'll show you. We recognize for you to understand what we do, you need to trust us, but you don't want to pay for that. Therefore, we'll invest in you. If we give you access to the best tech, the best people, will you give us a chance? Will you give us a chance? Will you talk to us? If the customer doesn't say yes, don't talk to them. Find a customer who's honest about, yes, I'd like to try this technology, but can you really help me? Yes. And if all I ask, you give me a chance and my team's a chance. And if we do a good job, you will talk to us. And this is what Red Hat did, and this is what we do. We really spend our time to understand what customers are trying to do. We're often accused of being slow. I take this the other way around. We're safe. We take time to understand. We walk before we run. We often go backwards before we go forward. We really, really listen to customers. And what we want to do is make sure what we build works. We're not there just to do POCs or just to do a quick win. We really want to get under the skin of the customer to work together. And that's very important. So it takes time.
Right. Well, let's talk about, though, Al, with regard to the roadmap. A lot of things are happening in a year with regard to main test nets, main nets. Everything's planned out pretty close together. Talk us through where we're at right now and what is coming in the next quarter.
Good. So we've already shipped our first piece of new technology. It's a new form of SQL for blockchain. So who would have thought a year ago people would be talking about SQL?
True.
Everyone was talking about solidity this, solidity that. But what people don't recognize is there's 8.5 million SQL developers around the world managing databases like Oracle, SAP, DB2, Informix. Many of them are not going to pick up a new language because they're either too old or they don't want to learn a new language. So we've now found a way to connect the old SQL technology with new blockchain. We developed what's called SQL-like technology. So we're now unlocking a large user base. That's already shipped. It's available on GitHub. We have a very aggressive timescale for shipping our testnet. So by the end of December, we will have our testnet launched, and then our mainnet will be early next year. But we do have some surprises as well. We have some apps we're building. We haven't talked about this. I'll give you an exclusive, Brad. We've developed some very, very cool apps to showcase our scalability. And one of them, believe it or not, is a game. Who would have thought a game would be what an enterprise company would develop? But a game is an excellent tool to showcase whether a system can or cannot scale.
Right.
I don't need to refer to the game or which architecture, but a game infamously broke a network.
Wow.
We are developing a game to show that our network is not easy to break. Whether it's unbreakable, we'll see. But we're launching a game. Its code name is called Captain AERGO. It will be a global game. It's a retro game. If you remember the Marvel comics that you and I used to read when we were a bit younger, it's built on that kind of retro, and it's built as an architectural game to not only be attractive to the end user, but it also will deploy and show how the system underneath it can be scaled. So this is something we haven't talked about before. It's called Captain AERGO. That's the code name. We'll be releasing that soon. I can't tell you when. We also have some other apps that we're developing to showcase the performance and the throughput of the system as well. So rather than building a community of dApps before you have a testnet, let's build the first apps at the same time as we're building a testnet to gain a market edge. And then we want to bring those out and then train other people how to write these dApps. Remember, I mentioned earlier, Brad, we've got these deployment blueprints. One thing you'll see from AERGO is everything we do, we will try to make it very simple, very well documented, very easy. So if you are trying to do a blockchain for the first time as a business, it could take you between 2 and 6 months to stand up a proper blockchain. We think we could do it in 2 weeks.
Wow, that's fast. And the blueprints obviously are key as well. But I want to talk to you a bit more about SQL as well, Phil, because a lot of people don't know exactly what SQL is. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is with regard to it being the old tech and why it is so valuable, given that you can already reach so many if they can make that switch? And if you could tell us, how can you prove that the feedback's been positive and that they are willing to make that switch across?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So I'm not the technical expert, but I'll try to explain this in the way I understand this, Brad. So SQL is a query language. It's a way for somebody who has a database to query the data of the database. I want to look up the data. I want to erase it. I want to do a transaction on this. In the blockchain world, we often talk about oracles, smart contracts. Smart contracts and oracles are ways of connecting with something on the blockchain that is immutable with the real world. It's in effect the interface between the real data in the world or real world and data stored on a blockchain.
Almost a modem in a sense.
Exactly. In the business world, we call that business logic. The business logic is how you codify, how you describe what you're trying to achieve. When a user logs in, please check this data. Is he or she a valid user? If this, do that. That is written in languages like SQL. It's a query language. And that hasn't been made available for blockchain users today. We're using more esoteric languages, more specialist languages. Solidity is great, but it's really a fringe use case for blockchain. The mass market wants to basically use blockchain to access data securely. So we thought if we could bring old tech, established tech into the new world and make it simple, we have a good chance to open up the pool of developers who can start using blockchain. Now, to your second point, how do we know this works? SQL is not appropriate for blockchain as is. It needs to be modified, structured, and it needs to be made light. So we've released the code on GitHub. We have, I think for the week it was out, it was the top performing open source project on GitHub. So we're getting a lot of feedback from developers, and this is exactly what we want. Put it out, get developers to query this, ask the question, why SQL, get people engaged with this, and then if it's good and it gets adopted, it gets a snowball effect. I'm glad to announce that we're seeing huge demand for this to move to the next level. People want to be trained on how to use blockchain with SQL. So we know this works. And this is what we'll do. We'll repeat the same model. When it's ready, put it on GitHub, get users to look at this, get feedback, improve, document, move to the next That's how we know our technology will work.
Sounds like a great model, Phil, but let's talk about also what you're doing to build out the developer capacity. Are you going to build out groups of people around the world who specifically are being supported by AERGO to develop, say, for example, dApps, to really build these dApp houses out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think this is probably one of the areas where we have an unusual approach, and I think it's probably the most viable approach longer term.
Okay.
You need blockchain developers to develop the technology, the sidechains, the infrastructure. You need to be able to build the plasma technology, make everything work at scale, support. We have those developers in BlockO, in Korea, and now in Europe as well. But you also need to bring in the enterprise side of things. So the enterprise, the internet, is built on open source. People don't talk about this, but everything that you mainly use, the core technology of the internet, the whole stack is open source. Open source developers go to projects they like. Open source developers go to projects where they have gurus already building code. Developers don't come for money. Developers come for the challenge. They want to work with equally good developers. Now, I've been lucky and blessed to have worked with some of the best developers in the world, incumbents like Red Hat, Cygnus, VMware, SpringSource. Those people who worked with me before, I'm glad to announce we are hiring them as part of the AERGO Foundation. So we have some of the top open source developers working for us. And over time, you'll see they will start communicating and blogging about our tech. And that will attract other developers into our ecosystem. So to get good developers, you need better developers. That's what we're focusing on.
It sounds like with all your experience, you're really bringing that to the fore with AERGO. Now, what about the community itself with regard to the complexities of cryptocurrency, the crypto community? How do you engage in that microcosm, or that very interesting iteration of, I guess, community building? Obviously, there's a huge imperative for they to have an understanding, because they are the token users, the token holders currently before utility hits the blockchain. How are you going to engage them with social platforms, with information?
Yeah, so for me, this is difficult to really understand because my background is enterprise, not crypto. So rather than me try to fake that I can understand this, what we've decided to do is hire specialists. So we're hiring crypto specialists into the team. So, for example, the head of our PR and marketing and crypto messaging is an 18-year-old whiz kid called Obaid.
Okay.
He is one of the best people we've met in the community, who's linked with developers. He reviews white papers. He's engaged with many projects. He's seen different communities form. He has the feel and the vibe. We're hiring people like that to help us understand how to talk to the community here. Somebody who's over 40 years old will never be cool for developers, for crypto developers, the crypto retail users. We need people from that community. So we try to use various social media platforms. We use Telegram, we use WeChat, we use Kakao and Line in Korea. We just opened up a specialist Telegram channel in Russia. We will use Medium, and then we'll use the usual business publications and technical publications like Forbes, TechCrunch, Reddit, ZDNet to try and spread the word. We have a difficult story to explain. Right. And on the one hand, we need to simplify this so the crypto community understands the utility behind the token and why this may be a good enough project to support. But then we also need to explain to developers and then end users. So we have our work cut out. So we're trying to hire more people and figure out the best way to talk to these different communities.
Sure, and it sounds like you've chosen someone who doesn't take the BS approach, like we've seen with some of those speaking for hype's sake, but someone really who's tech-driven. And I think that's going to be key as we move more and more into that enterprise sphere for the long term of blockchain and business that's really reframed in the decentralized design. I think, given that there's so much involved, we could talk for hours on AERGO and what it really stands for. Is there anything in particular that you really wanted to address, though, Phil, that you feel like we haven't addressed that is one of the key components of AERGO? Are you concerned at all about competition, for example, as they come in?
No. I think, in fact, I'll use WeChat as another example. Okay. The hypothesis behind AERGO's vision and its team and its whole model is we see a world where if data is the new oil, then how come data is controlled by the few? Google, Amazon, Facebook, Alibaba, the companies who are central ecosystems. For data to be the new oil, you need to make every company able to share their data without going through a control point. So we believe in distributed data, distributed trust. So the platform was built as a way for allowing businesses and users to share data anywhere around the world. The best example that's close is WeChat. WeChat, if you haven't used it, is a combination of Facebook, Google, Uber, all built in as one architecture. It's developed by one company, but with an open API to allow data to be shared with any software provider. They're providing an ecosystem, and they don't charge you a tax. Many of these other ecosystems, the only company that controls the data is the vendor that provides the ecosystem. Right. Google, Facebook, Amazon. So we believe it's not competition. We think the world in the future will be completely decentralized, trust-based networks. So we actually welcome new competition in the space. The more competition, the more you validate your market as well. So competition for me is a healthy thing.
Well, speaking of that, I heard you say recently in a different interview that you feel like things will shrink down in terms of the number of projects, the number of businesses that are trying to build out from as startups. Now, I found that interesting, given that inherent in that is the confidence that you feel like you're going to be in that top 10 that become, the next wave.
Yeah, I have confidence in the team. The team here is absolutely brilliant. I was super motivated when I met the developers, and they so much understand what they're trying to do. I'm very confident about the team. Whether we will succeed to be a platform or not, that depends on whether our customers really believe our vision. But the truth is, and I've coined this phrase many times, Brad, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Whenever a new big technology comes out, first they're the naysayers. People don't believe this. When Amazon first developed cloud, people laughed. Why would people want to rent computers? You could buy them in Best Buy or in Walmart. Yeah. 4 years later, they announced they had 4 billion revenues and many, many developers and many, many startups and big businesses using them. Then everyone rushed. If you go back 5 years ago, if you do a search on Google, you'll find there were probably over 1,000 cloud providers 4 years ago.
Wow.
Look today, there's 5. Google, Amazon Azure, Bluemix from IBM, Alibaba, and of course AWS. And between them, they control 75% of the market. But they control 75% of the market that's penetrated. It's less than 3% penetrated. There's a huge market opportunity here. So what happens with new tech? People don't believe it to begin with. Then there's a hype. Then people rush. Then there's a trough of disillusionments. And the ones who cross the chasm, as it's called, are the ones that win. We are focusing on understanding what the chasm looks like and how to enable customers. If we do our job right, we develop the tech, we attract the right developers, we're humble, we are cautious, we are trusted, we work with customers to showcase this technology step by step. We have the chance of being an enduring platform. That's our vision.
Absolutely, and that's well said. I think to close this very interesting interview now, I wish you all the very best as you move from one side of the chasm to the other. It's clear that you are building a very holistic approach. All the facets are being built right now for AERGO to really challenge the status quo, to really allow for a platform, as you'd mentioned, to be fully stacked, to allow for a movement into the cloud computing domain next year. Right now, you're focused on really building out the public blockchain and making sure that the value add of hybridization is well and truly built into the system. So I thank you once again, Phil Zamani, for your time. You are the CEO. You are leading something that really is also supported fundamentally by an already evidenced architecture called BlockO. And no doubt, it'll be interesting to see as you evolve, more dApps will be in the conversation next year, more developments, your testnet's coming. There's a lot to be discussed, and I look forward to speaking with you more.
Yeah, and Brad, I want to thank you for, first of all, the great questions and your time, and for giving me and the team the opportunity to talk to you and your community. You're very well regarded in this crypto community here. I really enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully this is the start of many future conversations. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome, and thank you once again. The CEO of AERGO, it's Phil Zamani. Thank you very much.